So it brings me great joy to start the final part of our program for today. And this is the panel discussion among all four speakers. And we have had the privilege to listen from all of them. But this panel discussion will be quite exciting because we're going to be able to hear their diverse perspectives on certain common questions. So if you have just joined us, allow me to reintroduce our illustrious panel. And they are Dr. Yinping from Asst, Mr. Keith O from Carousell, Ms. Nurul Hussain from the Codette project, and Dr. Setsuko Yokoyama from Asst at SUTD. So just as our audience is warming up, I would like to pose a question to the panel. And my first question, since our panel focuses on sustainable human-centric design, and very often I think as consumers, all of us have horror stories that about various designs that haven't worked for us or have failed us at critical junctures of our lives when we use them. So I would like to ask the question, which is, what is one wrong assumption about human-centric design that you see most often made? So Dr. Yang, would you like to kick off?
I can contribute a bit pretty maybe autonomous thought about this this topic because for my experience, for my research and a lot of industry collaboration, actually I've already assumed that design must be human-centric. Because I directly study very human-associated constructs, such as like, for example, the negotiation process as well as emotions. But very recently, I have had this thought about this human-centric design. Is it an inclusive terminology? Because I felt that somehow for some of us who have the privilege to study very directly human-centric variables or constructs, we are actually by default already practicing, and we must, right, do human-centric design because our users are humans. But if we take a step back, isn't that all technology should be benefiting humans, even they don't directly having human users? So we may not want to exclude those researchers or practitioners who are actually designing. For example, I have seen researchers focusing on defect detection in, for example, aircrafts. They are not really directly studying or interfacing with human users, but their way of the work is also supporting or benefiting ultimately for human being. So I'm just thinking that a very weird, out of norm kind of thinking that should we even expand the concept or the scope of human-centric design also to those who are actually not directly working with or studying humans as the focal constructs, or they do not directly study human as users? I'm just thinking along that line while you ask this question.
Yes, that's an interesting provocation, right? Because very often we use certain terms and then we overuse them. And to some extent, it can limit our thinking, and it can, unnecessarily constrain how we frame certain issues. So definitely something we should think about. Keith, would you like to share your thoughts?
Actually, to build on what Dr. Yang is saying, usually when we realize that, right, it's a little bit too late. Like, why is it that that there's a strong focus of like design in, say, aviation, in some industry? It's because we saw like great massive like disasters happening as a result. I think like we as a designer, like last time I studied the Bhopal nuclear accident, and we really study into like how the machinery was designed, and it didn't give cues early enough for the humans to sense the danger, or like aircraft accidents and things like that. When these accidents happen too often, then we pay attention, or humans in the loop, we need to do something about it. So I think but from my vantage point about being a designer, I do feel like yes, I do live in that luxury, like where I practice human-centric design, and everyone around me is doing that. I think one of the assumption I feel I need to correct, it's we use sometimes we feel like we I feel like we use empathy as a tool. Like I want to understand you, I want to know what's going on in your mind, and I want to manipulate you to do something for me. Like give me your email address, give me your credit card information, buy something from my website. Which I think it's also a responsibility that we need to be very mindful of. Like as a designer, we know how to design things, we know how to draw people in. I have a very classic example of NHS in the UK. So they did some website improvement optimization, and they managed to get UK citizens to opt into organ donation and transplant as a result of that. Of course, I mean, I think people should be fully aware that they are doing that and they are making an informed decision. We should never like um, con people into doing that, right? Like, give me your organs. So I think this is a very a subtle thing about using empathy as a tool versus like having real empathy. And I think when you have real empathy, uh, then you think about whether are you doing good by the users. So I think we also go into areas like ethics and whatnot, right? Like we can we have the ability to do something, but should we do it? I think that's why we see a lot with online technology. We do see things like addiction as a result, and I feel like these are problems that as a designer in tech, like I'm responsible for that. I should also be involved in solving it.
Mm, 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 mm. Great, fascinating. So it's a very Machiavellian sort of self-serving way of looking at empathy as a means to an end rather than empathy as an end to itself, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I guess designers need to be a little bit more concerned about. And I love the fact that you brought in the issue of ethics, because indeed universities, that is our larger calling, right? Our higher calling that we need to imbue in students, in future engineers, future innovators, the importance of having ethical principles as they are going about their work, so that it's not a case of, as you said, much too late, right? Just after the disaster, after the accidents, and then you think about, oh, what could we have done differently? So some interesting thoughts there. Nurul, would you like to share your thoughts on some wrong assumptions about human-centric design that you've encountered?
I would say that to me, the idea that there is one definition of human is actually something that needs to be pushed back on a little bit. Like when I hear someone say, well, this app is for everyone, then often, well, it's never true, right? So the app is for someone. This is, are you that someone or not? So even in that way, I think when we have some of these terms like human-centric design, like who are we thinking of when we think of human, and who's excluded by this definition? So what I really like what Keith said, which is about like empathy and ethics. And I think we need to go one step forward and say, with our assumptions and how we want people to use the things that we've designed, who's most at risk? And a very simple example is that, like online banking doesn't work for everyone. Right? Like the ease at which you make transfers, you transfer money, things like that. Often it's the people who are most at risk, like the elderly, people who may be impaired in decision making, that do not benefit from that ease, because we've seen over and over again that, like, it's, for example, these groups of people that get involved in online scams and then lose their life savings, and then we have to ask the question, well, is then digital banking, is then the ease of these digital services, the way that they've been designed, actually even good? Is it actually bad for them? And then that's because they're not the humans that have been thought about when we think about human or user-centric design.
Yes, absolutely. How do we actually make the definition of human in human-centric much more encompassing, right? And I think there's a lot of sort of chest beating, especially in the social sciences, about how a great deal of research is done on weird countries. And by weird, I mean white, educated, industrialized, rich, and developed. And so it basically marginalizes the rest of the world who don't fit into these weird classifications, right? But certainly with regard to online banking and so on, we've all had our fair share of frustrations. I myself have an elderly father who was forced to use an online platform for his share trading, and I had to struggle with the app for a very long time to download information for him. I have a PhD. It took me all day, and it was virtually impossible, but eventually I got around to it with a lot of legwork. But it's true, human-centric design, very often it's not sufficiently human in terms of its interpretation of what constitutes the human profile. So last but not least, Setsuko, would you like to share with us your views on wrong assumptions in human-centric design?
Sure, my answer is very short. The wrong assumption is that when it's an afterthought, you know, an add-on to the existing technology, the existing products that, you know, many of us are eager to sell, right? And use it for marketing purposes. That doesn't, you know, transform the figure of the object or the service that we offer. But I also see the challenge, right? When we work in specific disciplines and, you know, are dedicated to, say, drones, we want the solution to revolve around drones. But sometimes, you know, if you center humans and if the communities don't want or need drones, maybe the you know, solution we have at hand is not the way to go. And I think that is the challenge. As a humanists and, you know, STEM engineers need to be in conversation with, so that the questions, that the reasons why we do what we do is driven by the need of the community, rather than how can we, you know, refashion what we have already and then market it as, oh, this is human-centric, this should be good for you, right? So I think when it's an afterthought, that's a wrong assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very often it's used in a very sort of mechanical way, right? Like now that we've built it, you know, how can we really make it resonate with the audience so that they think it's something that they must have, and so on. And so it's really very much, you know, a very exploitative way, you know, of looking at things to see where are the advantages to resonate with the human condition, rather than to think about the human condition and to design for it as a first principle, right? And I think that's where interdisciplinary education also plays a very important role, because when we have engineers, architects, innovators who are already imbued with, say, exposure to the humanities and the social sciences, they will be much more conscientious and conscious of incorporating human needs, human lifestyles, human values, and cultures into their design. So it will become less of an afterthought, like code first, market later, right? So I think that's a sort of a holy grail that as educators we must also strive for. So my second question for the panel is our societies are digitalizing, right? And just now Nurul talked about digital banking. So as our societies are digitalizing so intensely around the world, you know, whether it is weird countries or not, how can designers cater to the fact that different segments of the population are at varying stages of digital adoption? I mean, we've got the teenagers who can make TikToks, you know, with their eyes closed, but we've also got the elderly members of the society, you know, who are still actually figuring their way out around a smartphone, even how to make a call. And obviously along the spectrum, you're going to have very different pockets of people with different levels of digital competencies, different previous experiences, different assumptions about how technology works, and so on. So how can we cater to this very broad spread of users as societies digitalize? Keith, would you like to kick off?
Yeah. So when I hear this question, I thought of two people I met sort of in the course of my work. First was this guy that I always go for massage, because he's blind, visually impaired, and then we were chatting one day, and he was like asking me like why I work. I said, oh, I work at Carousell. And then he's like, oh, I heard a lot about Carousell from my friends. It's a place where you can buy Rolex watches. So that was his impression. But then, you know, I felt a little bit sad, like that he actually cannot use our product. he's hearing about these things, and he's hearing about oh, you can buy watches, but he's just hearing about it, and he can't really use it. And I must say that yes, like Carousell today, we are not well. Honestly, we need to really develop the product to be more accessible, to be more universal for more types of users. And then a second story that a second person I met was this lady. So I was doing some consultancy work back in the days, and I met this lady who was sharing with me how she navigates Singapore. So she's visually impaired as well, and how she cannot take buses to go to anywhere. So she only take buses to places where she's familiar with. But when she's on the bus, she can memorize the feeling. So like whether the bus has make a turn, right, left, and by how many like twists and like turns and whatnot, she knows she's at the right location. So it's like that really inspired us to be thinking about like how does one remember like your journey, a bus journey, right? So that really gave us quite a bit of inspiration. So back when I was in IDEO, right? So one of the thing that we do in our design process was to look at extreme users, people with extreme needs in the system, and they will inspire us to develop interesting solutions for everyone. I always like to give this example of SMS. So not sure if people in the audience, like, do you all know, like SMS was first developed as a protocol for people like the deaf and mute community to communicate with each other. But it was the telcos who then picked it up as, this is a very cheap way of sending messages to each other. Because back then, I guess the technology is not so good, right? That's why there's a character limit and whatnot. But so they saw the business model behind it, and then SMS was then created, and now everyone is, and we already passed the general era of SMS, and we are all on WhatsApp, Line, and now video call. So clearly, you can see a technology that was meant for a very niche group of users later became a standard for everyone. So I think we can do more to actually look at our extreme users, design for them, and actually when you design for them, you are also at the same time designing for the entire population.
Keith, I have a very interesting epilogue to your SMS story, which is that what happened was as SMS was taking off in Europe, teenagers discovered that the telcos were using SMS to send free notifications to the users about how much data they had left and so on. And the teenagers realized that SMS was free. So they started to use SMS to communicate with each other, which then led the telcos to think about messaging as another service that they could market to the broader population. So indeed, it helps to bring another point to your broader statements. So thank you. Next, Dr. Yang, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I have two things to share. One, I think I will start with a positive effect of digitalization that I personally experienced through COVID-19, and the other one is it's a negative trend. But before that, I also want to add to Prof. Lim's remark that I'm also a happy customer and big fan of Carousell, for which I benefited a lot of all the motivating factors that you outlined, whether it's about to let go some product that is still of value for others, as well as getting some very useful secondhand things that meet my needs. So really, I can talk a lot and be maybe potentially you're one of your ambassador. The back to Prof. Lim's question, I think one of the positive thing I personally experienced is something I didn't imagine, that actually the Zoom thing actually enables some collaboration I have never been able to make with someone. For example, a researcher, take an example, a researcher who is physically disabled. So I've never met him, even though we share common research interests in person before COVID-19. But then the Zoom thing actually connect us, and then we had a very good chat, and then we eventually had some project together. So that is something I was thinking that in the usual time, some of us are privileged, right? We can meet in person, we can travel to nice places such as Paris for conferences, but we have forgotten a lot of researchers in my profession. They do not have the luxury to afford in international travel, whether physically or financially. So that's a good thing. I think the Zoom thing actually helped in a way that to bring more researchers, even without the kind of, the privilege, the financial and then the physical privilege to participate. So that is a nice thing I observed through this increasing digitalization, digital communication. The bad thing, which is also a trend I personally experienced, is that I felt that with digitalization, our visual we are getting our aging in our eyes maybe accelerated, right? I personally developed the problem that is only associated with older age, which I see blurry text in screen during COVID-19. And you know that I'm just slightly above 40. I thought it was too early. But then when I searched that, it's really maybe is extensive use of a lot of digital devices and then a lot of short distance kind of vision where we rarely go out. So that is perhaps a trend that we may see even in the near future. There are a lot more people even in a younger age, started to experience visual problems. So that might be a trend that has a lot of implication for designers and in general, especially for the care of the youth generation as well. Yeah, so that is just two points to contribute.
About device overuse and eyesight is certainly something in myopia nation, myopia capital. Singapore has one of the highest rates of myopia in the world. And it's certainly something that we do need to pay attention to. Besides, other factors like making technology effective, we also have to think about whether or not it will cater to the issues of human health, right? So that's definitely something to factor in. Dr. Yokoyama, would you like to share your views?
Sure. So the question was what to do when everybody's at a different stage with the digital literacy, but everybody's, as a society, is kind of merging towards full digitization mode. So maybe one principle from design justice might be useful here. So there's this principle number 6, which says we believe that everyone is expert based on their own lived experience, and that we all have unique and brilliant contributions to bring to a design process. So I think the essence here is not to coerce everybody towards one big goal to become part of the smart nation, but to meet everyone at where they are and figure out what they need. And I think one of the kind of driving principles of design justice is to kind of democratize the idea of designers. It used to be such an elitist thing to be, and it remains to be the case in the whole industry. But design justice says everybody is a designer. We all want our world to be a little bit more livable, a little bit more kinder and generous and all that. So even, for those who suffer from the challenges of the online banking, they might know what they want, and so they can be the designer. And those who have the technical capabilities, right, they can assist to make that vision come true. So really kind of democratizing the design process might be the key here.
Yes, indeed. We shouldn't just go for the one size fits all because that's the easiest, right? But to think about democratization in the interest of customizability so that every product or service caters to the varying levels of needs. And I think when I think back to the research that I did on elderly people using feature phones, it was such a challenge because the text entry was so difficult. Even setting the language for the 3G phones was so difficult, right? But now with the new tablets, with the new smartphones, the customization digitalizability is at a much higher level. And I think these innovations have actually helped to make technology more inclusive, even as we still have a long way to go, but we have come pretty far. So that's a good sign. Nurul, would you like to wrap up this question?
Sure. So with this question, I think what is interesting is that very few people are questioning if we should continue to digitalize. And that's something I feel we don't hear enough of. Is it actually a good thing? And if it is a good thing, is it a good thing in the short term or in the long term? And what are we losing through this process? And one thing that's been quite clear is that even though we talk about the slower uptake among senior citizens for certain digital processes versus, say, for example, teenagers taking to a lot of these online payments very quickly, being able to pay for online games and things like that. What are we actually saying that these two groups are fundamentally very different in terms of happiness or health or social connections and things that are much harder perhaps to measure and much more longer term, but which for us as a society, especially in a society like Singapore, which is both small but dense and interconnected, are we losing more by this push to digitalize some of these things rather than actually saying, should we measure instead the impact of digitalization, not just in the, like, how many transactions, how many people have signed up, but, if you lose the great joy that getting 10 cents off your order at, or at like a store, or like 10 cents off your taxi fare, there's great joy in that. But that can really only happen if you pay in cash. And that's a human-to-human interaction that's facilitated by cash. But when you move to a digital transaction, then you make that transaction a very remote one. There's no way for that person to give you a 10-cent reduction. And then there's no way for you to feel that joy. So for me, that's a good question. And it's not just, even though these are very important things too, it's not just to look at the different user groups, the different user experiences, and how can we customize for them, but to ask the larger question of, are we really just looking at short-term benefits instead of the long-term effects of digitalization? And I say this as someone who is a proponent of tech and is a proponent of technology, that I am worried that we're losing some of these things, and that's because we're not thinking in a human-centered way for the long term.
Fascinating. I agree with you that and again, this is very much your principle of norms not being normal, right? We really should question the fundamentals, all of these things that we increasingly take for granted. On the point about the joy of the 10-cent coins, actually, there are parents who have talked about how increasingly schools in Singapore are allowing kids to pay for their canteen food in a digital format. And the parents say that actually the children not being able to experience the tactile, process of counting out your money, giving the change, and so on, also can impede their development of financial literacy. So it may not just be the loss of joy, but also the loss of, financial skills and so on. But certainly there are very many examples we can think about that with digitalization, you will lose something. So you've given me an idea that maybe we should start something like a human cost index to digitalization, and then to map it against different processes and so on. But yes, I think we've had such a rich diversity of ideas and perspectives today. And when I think back to 3 hours ago when we started at 2 p.m. with Dr. Yang taking us through the whole issue of natural language processing, emotions, how to detect sarcasm, and then to the joys of decluttering through platforms like Carousell, and then moving on to how we imagine the invisible, especially through putting forward people who are underrepresented in technology. And then finally, to think about how the ableist framework actually can limit and constrain how encompassing and inclusive technologies can be. I think we've come on a very long yet interesting, fascinating journey this afternoon with our wonderful panel of speakers. So if the audience will join me in giving a big round of applause, I think we have certainly, benefited greatly from all of the different perspectives that have been shared today. So please join me in giving our speakers a big round of applause, virtual one. So I missed that. I missed the applause, the real actual one. But thank you again to our panel. I believe Professor Chai Li Xiang is joining us to give his wrap up of the conference. So thank you again to our panel.